Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Maternal Minds. I'm your host, Windsor Flynn. I am on the advisory board of Made of Millions, and I also am an OCD sufferer. I had postpartum OCD after the birth of both of my children, so talking about this topic is really close to my heart. I think it's super important to share. I have Kim French with me today. She also had postpartum OCD, and I'll just go ahead and let her introduce herself.
I don't know if you can hear all the clapping in the background, but just introing the show. We just had the NHS clap for carers moment. Yeah, I'm Kim, and I got diagnosed and had my sort of most intense episode of OCD after my daughter was born 3 years ago. I work for a production company. I live in England, obviously. And yeah, it's something I look back on, and I've really suffered since my early 20s. I think on that cusp of like adulthood, it gets really sort of intense, doesn't it? Yeah, and it's just gone in waves throughout my 20s. Like sometimes I've felt absolutely fine, and then other times it's just been so dark and so low. And you just, I think, as we were saying earlier, you just feel like a different person. Like your brain is in such a different state that it's hard to remember what it was like when it was really bad. So, yeah.
So when you were in your 20s, can you share what your experience was like, and maybe when you first had your first sort of session?
Yeah, so my earliest memory of, I mean, again, who knows, I might have had other things when I was younger, but my first sort of obsessive thought of really, really negative, dark thoughts was something that was triggered when I was reading a book or reading a newspaper article, and it was, the subject matter was sort of focused on child abuse and boys being abused, I think in a wood, and it just haunted me, and my brain just latched onto it. I think it happens with other people who don't have OCD. Obviously, these horrible, like, you know, they're horrible, right? So they sort of stay in your mind. But my mind was sort of at first horrified, then slowly tried to sort of twist it around and ask, you know, oh well, you know, what do you really think about that? And yeah, would you do that? And just got out of hand from there.
So was it a theme that you had even like been scared of before? Because child abuse is like, it's so random. There's so many other things that are in the news and scary. Do you have an idea of why that one kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, so again, with my therapist sort of unfolding certain aspects of things, I've had a wonderful childhood. Like I've never been, you know, in any situation like that, other than one in the sort of periphery of my social groups. I remember having and again, I don't really believe that it has to be from a specific event. I think that these things and these thoughts can just come out of nothing. You know, like I don't believe in the sort of Freudian looking back.
Oh no, me either.
But there was one thing that happened which obviously probably had an impact, where there was a drama teacher who was accused of like grooming a girl who I was in drama class with, and yeah, it really tormented me because I loved the guy. Like I think it was that sense of people not being who they really are.
Totally.
Or you know, I think I can deal with the sort of stereotype of what a paedophile is, like someone who is, yeah, you kind of look at them, as awful as it sounds, and there's a stereotype, but it's when people seem so kind and so friendly and so normal. I couldn't.
Oh, there's your cat. I know. I'll probably have an interruption soon.
That really messed with me, and I then thought, well, if I'm normal, then I can do that. Like,
yeah, for sure. Because there's this whole thing, like when you think of a pedophile or a child abuser or a murderer or something, you kind of expect them to be a certain way, right? There's this narrative that they're these horrible, awful people. But then you hear stories and it's like, nope, that person was just a neighbor. And other people will say, he was such a nice guy, or she was so wonderful to me. And then it kind of opens up that inner dialogue. Well, if that person could be one way to so many people and still be this way on the inside, then why can't I be that way?
Yeah. And it puts massive meaning on those thoughts, even those thoughts that everyone kind of, well, again, not everyone, but like a lot of people get really weird, random thoughts and they don't actually, they can just dismiss it. And I know that because I get other thoughts that are, because in many respects, I definitely don't get fixated on anything about contamination. Like I can be quite messy and like, it just isn't something that I get stuck on. But I can understand, I don't know, I can have a random thought about something and it just doesn't bother me. Whereas the child abuse aspect, it just horrified me so much that that's what my brain decided to latch onto.
Let's stick onto that. So would you say that that was your main theme for years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. But I think I've had other things. Now I look back, I think I had sort of other things about questioning relationships and questioning sexuality and things like that, but actually they didn't become as like strong as the child abuse one.
As a child abuse one. So while you were experiencing all this in your 20s, what was your main compulsions, or did you have any at the time that you were engaging in?
Yeah, I think that there was a combination of ones in my head, which were arguing, like just constant arguing with myself against the thought. And then
can you hear that?
Yeah, it's fine. And another one was I would sit on my hands because I was so terrified of what my hands would do. So I would sit on my hands and or just be like just really conscious of where my hand placement was. I remember because I used to I worked as an editor and, you would have people in the room with you. And I remember, someone sort of talking, his child wasn't even there, but he was talking about her. And I just remember just freaking out and like having to sit on my hands for, I don't know why. It was just, a compulsion, basically.
Crazy. I like whenever people say these things, I like to be like crazy, but I know it's not crazy, but it just means like,
yeah, I know.
Interesting how the pull would be so strong to protect the other people when they're not even in the room, that you're like going to sit on your hands, or just that the uncertainty is so strong that you feel like you must do that to prevent anything from happening. So did your harm thoughts go to adults, or was it mostly just with kids?
No, it did go to adults actually. I looked throughout the years and I definitely had an awful time for fear of doing something to my mum. She won't mind me saying it. I think she knows.
Wow.
And I was just mortified by that, and therefore found it really hard to be close to her. It's not something she would have ever noticed that I was doing, like, but I knew I was. Yeah.
Just like always in your head about it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you told me that you had suffered for about 10 years before you finally got a diagnosis. How were you able to cope during all that time without getting help?
Well, I kind of touched on getting help. So I lived in Canada for nearly 4 years, and I'd gone out to be with a boyfriend, and then I'd had but the majority of time kind of by myself, so obviously away from friends. I had loads of great friends there, but I was away from family. And I thought that a lot of it was the stress of being homesick, and because it goes in waves, like you can have a really bad time and then you come out of it and you feel better again. I was just kind of constantly riding those waves.
Yeah.
And I would go out and party and like just forget everything, and then I would have a total breakdown. And I was also very I would push a lot of people away through certain actions and the way that I behaved. I don't know, I guess a bit of a coping mechanism. But I did see multiple therapists, but I never accepted the help properly. I actually look back, I think I threw it away, but because I just wanted to forget that I'd not taken any notes of it. But I look back and I'd gone to like a psychology like clinic, actually spoken with someone, and they said, this is OCD, this is what you have. But at the
I mentioned it too.
Yeah. And I was just still, I kind of thought, okay, great, I know now, that's great. I know what it is, so fine. But I didn't do anything about it.
Did you believe that you had it? Like, did you do any research or anything?
Yeah, so I think by then I kind of like understood. I spent, I don't know, let's say from like 23 kind of understanding that it was OCD, but not having an official diagnosis, not getting any help, and realizing that the biggest trigger was still to come. Like the worst time was still going to be when I had my daughter.
So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so when I was pregnant, I had a really, like, I got very, like, I had a lot of morning sickness, but generally it was a good pregnancy. And I had therapy during that pregnancy because I thought, again, it was kind of
traditional talk therapy.
Yeah, well, it was a night. It was CBT, but it was not exposure therapy. Like, it wasn't the right therapy for me.
Yeah,
I've seen a couple of therapists. So I saw one on the NHS and then one privately, but it was in preparation for having a child. In my mind, I thought, oh, I'm doing everything right. I'm making sure I'm, you know, mentally prepared. I really thought I was doing everything right. But when she was born, like, it was 3 months in, all the usual stuff, baby blues, hormonal, you know, everything that you would expect. But it was 3 months, I had a massive trigger. Shall I talk about that? I had a trigger where I was on Facebook and it was like 2 a.m. and I was breastfeeding. Well, actually, no, I wasn't breastfeeding because I stopped after a month because I don't know, I couldn't do it. But
yeah, I mean, it's a huge deal. Breastfeeding is.
Yeah. Like, huge respect to people that do, and actually, to be honest, huge respect for people that don't. Like, it's whatever is right for you. I realize that.
Being a mom is so hard, no matter how you feed your baby. I mean,
yeah. So I was fragile. I was really fragile, and I was just kind of.
Did you have anxiety at this point, or any sort of like depression, or were you just coasting along, riding the hormone wave?
I think I was anxious about multiple things that weren't to do with the OCD. I think the breastfeeding thing. So once I decided to stop, I actually went through a few weeks afterwards trying to bring my milk back in and actually thinking I'd made a huge mistake. So I totally messed with my body, and I was in a bit of a state. But with so 3 months in, I had this trigger where I was reading Facebook and someone had shared a story about, just, it's not even worth talking about, but just something awful, like, about child abuse. And I remember bawling my eyes out for about an hour with her asleep in the bed next to me, just crying. And because it was so horrifying to read it, I think that was a normal reaction, because parents, I think, when you have a child, like, all these stories are like tenfold, aren't they? It's like even worse.
Yeah. And the crying at that stage when you have a baby, like, you could cry at a Midas commercial. So it's not.
I was very emotional anyway, but then it twisted. So it was like almost like a normal reaction to begin with, and then it twisted around, and it was like, wow, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm capable of doing this. Like, and from then it was just so it is this pivotal kind of moment in the diet, you know, my journey with it, where as soon as that happened, I knew the therapy I was getting wasn't right.
Did you tell your therapist about it?
I'm trying to think of what part this was. Yes, I did. And I look back now and I think of how dangerous, in a way, it was. Her reaction was, because she was trying to, like, she was reassuring me a lot. So she was trying to like normalize it in a way that wasn't exposure therapy. It's hard to explain it.
But do you believe her? Like,
I don't want to misexplain it here because I just feel like I don't want to get that part wrong. But she was kind of not sort of treating it in the right way. Like she wasn't shocked by the thoughts, but she wasn't helping me in the right kind of way. I realize now when I did get the right therapist. So I'd had that bad trigger, and then there's a woman called Bryony Gordon. Do you know her?
Mm-mm.
She's amazing. So she's a journalist here in the UK, and she's written like both books and articles, and done a lot of talking about her experience with pretty much the same kind of OCD. And she was doing a talk like in London, and I was like, I have to go. Like I heard her on a podcast. And this is also, sorry, I'm remembering it all now. This is also a time when so my husband and I worked together, and I was adamant that I needed to go back to work because for me, that was the solution.
Yeah. So, well, it's to put distance between you, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I avoided her for a week. And I thought I was fixed. And then as soon as I came back, it was like
worse.
That's when it truly got really bad. So that's when I'd gone that Friday up to London to see Bryony talk. I had a quick chat with her, and I sort of opened up about it, and then I felt really good. And then I went home and I felt horrendous because it all came then, the doubt, what if it's not OCD?
Yeah.
And then it happened relatively quickly. So it's like I knew something was really badly wrong. I called my health visitor. She was amazing, really supportive. So the woman that kind of helped sort of guide me through my birth, and she wasn't like there at the birth, but it's just, I don't know if you have the same out in the States, but
is it kind of like a doula?
Yeah, no, she's not a doula because she sort of wasn't kind of there, but she was always the person, anything that came to the baby, like she would be the person that you could speak to. Kind of like a midwife, but someone that's just, available for you. She was brilliant. And I called her and I said, it's like, it's bad. Like I can't be around my child. I'm spending, the moment my husband goes to work, I'm trying to leave the house when he does because I don't want to be alone with her. I was reading articles, which was another compulsion, just reading them literally from the moment he left the house to the moment he came back.
Like articles about what?
Articles about trying to reassure myself that this was OCD. Mm-hmm. So saying things over and over and over and over and over, that I knew it was OCD, but I had to continue to reassure myself, going just in case. My daughter, like I was able to care for her, I was able to do everything, but like with tears in my eyes. So it was just like not healthy. It was not.
No, it's so hard.
I shouldn't have kept going.
And they can all, like, people always love to say like, be careful, don't be anxious around your baby will get anxious, your baby can pick up on your feelings and everything. So it's like, when you're trying to take care of a child and you're doing your very best and you're just, really anxious, you have these thoughts about, I don't know, killing them, abusing them, who knows what that you come up with, right? It's so hard because then you have that added layer of, or at least for me, of like feeling guilty about it. And
you feel like you're the person that's supposed to protect the child, but you're like, how do I protect the child from myself? So my whole kind of point was literally, so I called, I think it was sort of like one of the days at the beginning of the week after this week at work, where I'd then been home, and I called my husband and I said, you need to come back because I'm walking myself.
So here's the question. Did you open up to your husband about it? Did you tell him?
Yes. So, and he was brilliant. And again, the thing is, I think it's really hard to sort of say how you should open up to people and what their reaction should be, because it's just, some people will go, oh yeah, I get it. And other people will be really shocked by it, and it's not their fault. Like they can't, if they don't understand it, it's really hard to sort of So for him, he understood the themes, but he didn't want to hear the detail, of course.
Yeah, it's hard to hear.
He doesn't, yeah. And also the detail almost doesn't matter. It matters very much to you, but it doesn't matter because that's not the point. It is this sense that it is the whole certainty thing. I have to be certain that I will never do these things to my child. And then the part of recovery is obviously accepting that everybody can do anything to anyone. Which is hard, but it's
really hard.
It eventually works. So I called him. I said, you have to come home. He was obviously really worried. And then he took the week off work, stayed with my daughter. I walked myself up to A&E. Like I was like, I'm sick. Like enough. Mm-hmm. I thought about doing this for a while, but
What's A&E? Is that like the emergency room?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we live really close to the hospital. So I literally walked myself up there, like when I eventually got to see a nurse, a guy.
So it was just that when I just want to rewind a little bit. So when you told your husband, he obviously wasn't worried about you actually doing it, right? He was just more concerned that you were having in such a way about it.
Yeah. So, and I think hopefully that goes for most partners because they know you.
Mm-hmm.
They know you.
When I told my husband, he was like, okay, that seems like a really weird thing to worry about. I'm not worried.
Yeah.
But then
you're not going to do anything. But the problem is as well, I think that's also a reassurance. So it's like, it's really hard for partners to know how they should do. But that was enough at the time for him to say that. And then I knew it was on me to get better. So I walked myself up to A&E and spoke with an incredible nurse who was super understanding. He was like, he just made me feel a lot better.
So he knew about OCD then?
Yeah, I think he must have. I did then meet another nurse who didn't, and that was quite damaging.
Because some people will tell their story and they get social services called.
Yeah, so I had that. I didn't have social services come, but there was like a hint of that, as in like, well, she was like, if you don't tell me the thoughts, I may have to inform social services. I was like, I'm not telling you anything because once
they mentioned that, it's like story.
And I completely clammed up and I was like, no, I'm not talking to you. And then I ended up staying the night. I was just kind of in a ball, sobbing uncontrollably.
It's so.
Oh, it's horrible. Yeah, and I remember having a little, Sudoku, like a little puzzle.
Yeah.
Thing. So I was like, okay, this is going to distract me from the thoughts. I was like, I'm going to play Sudoku. I'm going to sit in this hospital bed waiting to see someone. I'm going to play Sudoku. And I would go from playing a bit of Sudoku to then.
Wait, so you brought the Sudoku or it was just in the way?
I had it in like a little book. Yeah, I brought it with me. I was like, this is going to distract me.
Okay.
It didn't really, but it was something.
A little.
But then every time the thoughts would flood back and I would feel so awful, and it wasn't even I think it got to a point where it wasn't even thoughts, it was just a guttural sick feeling,
just like a feeling of like, not like you're gonna do it, but just a feeling that you can't ever be sure that you won't.
It's pure dread. It's basically dread. And I remember thinking one of my obsessions was this sense of like, oh, okay, well, we'll go through our whole lives and I won't do anything, like, but then I will in 30 years. Like I was literally like, but I will in 30 years time.
I had that one too. Like someone was like, I was like, okay, so maybe I won't kill my kids, but what if when I become a grandparent and they ask me to babysit because they need to go to work, what if the stress is too much and I put them in the frying pan and it's like,
oh my God.
I'm worried that it's so far away and so off the charts.
I think you literally, like, one of the helpful things, and I don't know if this is like proper advice, but you sometimes actually have to laugh, like literally laugh at the thoughts. Like that's so absurd. But also one of the things that really helped me was, and I don't know if it works for everyone again, but it's like filling my mind with worse thoughts. So I would be like, okay, so there's an obsession of a horrible, I'm going to do this. And then just go, okay, well, what if I did even more? Like, whatever, you know, and I would just like,
you kind of turn it into a game where you're the boss. You're not just.
My brain would just be like, oh, okay, so you're fine with these thoughts then. Okay. And then they would go.
Yeah, it's a great way to make your OCD stop talking. It's kind of like a non-engagement response, but just take it up a few notches. But you just have to beat the OCD is what you have to do, because it thrives off of like surprising you and catching you off guard and trying to, like, I don't know, scare you and make you think that you're capable of all these things. But if you already are accepting the narrative, not accepting, yes, I'm going to do it, but accepting like, okay, my brain's going to throw this at me today.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll just give it something even worse. And then it's kind of like, oh, okay, you win. I'm done for today.
It's like, it's breaking the cycle, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, otherwise it will just keep going.
Yeah. So when you checked yourself into the hospital, the emergency room, and you said you stayed there overnight and you found someone who was helpful. So what happened after that? Like, how quickly were you able to receive treatment, and how quickly did you start seeing an improvement?
So I chatted with 3 people. So there's the initial nurse who was really kind, but it wasn't huge detail, but he was great. Then a psychiatric nurse who didn't understand OCD and was talking about the whole social services. She was fine, but she just didn't get it.
Wow.
That was the person I was like, I'm not speaking to her. I was like, I'm not going to talk to her again. Then I think it was either another nurse or a doctor. And again, super understanding, but I'm pretty sure he didn't really, really know what it was. And it was at that point where I thought, okay, well, I can get a diagnosis through the NHS. I can go this route, but I know it's going to take a long time, and I'm not necessarily going to get the right person if I don't pay for this. And I know that I am privileged enough to be able to pay for private therapy, but honestly, I think it costs like £700 in the end. It's the best money I've ever spent. And I would like
£700 an hour?
No, God, in total. So it was like £70 or 75 an hour, and I did 10 weeks of it. So what happened was, I knew the NHS couldn't necessarily give me what I needed. So I found an incredible website called Maternal OCD. Don't know if you know.
Okay, I'll write that down here.
Diana and Maria, who are just incredible, and both have their
story. They do a charity too.
Say again?
Do they run a charity too?
Yeah, so Maternal OCD is a charity. It's small, and they did and do sort of peer support. And basically, I called Diana, and I remember she was like, "Oh, I'm going to pull up the side of the road because I'm in my car, but I'm going to chat to you." And she was the one that basically told me the psychologist to go to get a diagnosis.
Okay.
And gave me the name of the therapist that ultimately helped me recover. And so I will be eternally grateful to her. And then through Maternal OCD, that's how I met. I'm trying to think if I met Catherine through Maternal OCD. But we both try and support them where we can as well. So which is why we've done various talks at OCD Action. Yeah, but Diana, I remember the things that she shared with me in terms of her thoughts, and I was like, oh, I'm not alone.
It's such a relief to find out that you're not by yourself in that. So that was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And you only did the 10 sessions?
Yeah, so I've had more than 10, but it was like once a week for 10 weeks. And it was hard because it brought up a lot of other things. And again, I didn't get properly diagnosed, but there was a sense of like PTSD. I traumatized myself so much.
Oh, for sure. People have talked about that. I've heard some other advocates talk about that a lot. Like the trauma that you feel, that you go through before a diagnosis is so intense that you can have PTSD symptoms after. Yeah. And so you're dealing with both. So not maybe like once you're not so bothered by the OCD anymore, you can still get flashbacks of it, and really upsetting.
I think one of the biggest things to overcome that, and again, something Catherine always talks about, is in the face of all, because you end up hating yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm a monster. Like, I was ready to say, like, well, I did, I think, at one point when I was in the hospital, and again, I was in obviously a bad state of mind, but I was like, you need to lock me up. I was just like, yeah, before I do anything, you need to lock me up. So, which is mad.
Which is so, like, it just shows how strong the doubt is with OCD, because a real person who really would do that would never go to a hospital, would never share their thoughts, and would never, this is reassurance for everyone out there, but just more as a source of information too. It's an actual pedophile or a murderer with plans wouldn't do that. They would not turn themselves in, and they wouldn't like ask to be put away to protect people.
Yeah, totally. But you're right, in many respects, even though it's important for people to know that, and that your anxiety is as a result of the fear of doing the things, like that in itself is a protective, caring, kind thing.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it is reassurance, if you constantly say, oh, but I'm a good person,
Yeah.
you can't do that, because that in itself is a compulsion. I think OCD is just really complicated.
It's super complicated, but I feel like one of the main things, like, I don't know if tell me if this was your experience, but when I first started treatment, I had the pedophile thoughts and, the murderous ones too. But my first few sessions were basically, the first session was one big reassurance, but on the premise of, okay, I'm going to tell you all this and it will reassure you, but this is the last time you'll ever get reassurance from me. But you need to know that all the things that you think about yourself, it's not true. And then she just like laid down all this knowledge. And I think with learning all that knowledge does come a certain level of reassurance, which can really just propel you forward and give you that energy you need to continue on with the therapy and just know deep down that you're not a bad person. But it can quickly turn into like a compulsive behavior if you keep reminding yourself, this is just OCD. I'm really a good person. People with OCD don't do that. Yeah.
Totally. And I think with both obsessions and compulsions, from my experience, it's the difference between having a weird thought and then obsessing over a weird thought. And it's the difference between reassuring yourself one time and constantly reassuring yourself. Anything that goes to an extreme is an unhealthy thing.
So you finished your 10 sessions, and did you continue on with therapy? Like, are you seeing a therapist now currently?
Yeah, so I do. I mean, I think I saw, it was just before all this crazy COVID stuff. I was going through, because as you said before, like stress is a big trigger for any mental health problems, but I was going through a stressful time with work, and it was just all quite full on, and I was like, okay, well, I need to talk to her about that to just make sure I keep myself in check. So every few months I'll try and talk to her. Also, I at that time upped my medication. So I don't know, I'll talk about the medication side of things.
Oh, well, that's important. People always ask. So did you use the medication as part of your recovery from OCD, or is that separate?
Yeah, I did. So I, again, at first always this sort of, I definitely don't feel it now, but like at the beginning it was kind of this, oh, do I really need medication? It was like, again, I think, if you're diabetic or you need insulin, like it's not a stigma, there should be no stigma around being on medication. So yes, I was on medication sort of parallel to my therapy. And I remember my therapist always saying it's like water wings, like it's not going to fix you on your own. And to be honest, neither is talking therapy necessarily if you need medication. But to do both together was the solution for me. And then having recently increased it slightly because I identified the fact that there were stresses in my life that I knew needed to be, I just needed to be able to stay on top of. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm actually kind of getting through this whole self-isolation thing okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've approached uncertainty. Like everyone's like freaking out. I'm like, well, anything can happen at any time. So this is what this is. You know, this is the world. Uncertainty in action.
Yeah.
But also because my medication is a bit higher, so I just generally feel a bit more okay and a bit less sad for no reason, which sometimes happens.
Yeah. And that's so important to talk about, you know, taking the medication and doing what's best for you, because not everybody's going to have the same, you know, the same treatment process. Not everybody's going to take medication. Not every medication is going to work for each person. And some people take the medication and that's all they need. It just curbs their thoughts enough that the OCD doesn't bother them. For me, taking medication was so terrifying to me that I probably wouldn't even have been able to see the benefits, because I would have just been so nervous about what I was scared about from the medication.
Yeah.
But I was able to just do my CBT and my ERP. Mm-hmm. And it took much longer, I think. Like I needed way longer than 10 sessions. But that's been enough for me. I think each person just...
It is, you're right, because I think I got to a point where I wasn't afraid of taking the medication, if that makes sense. So it's like, also I responded really well to it. I know people who've been on the same one and they've not responded well to it. So I felt fortunate that I was okay. It wasn't easy at the beginning, but then I knew that it would be okay. But
can you see the messages on here?
No.
Can you see the comments or no? Oh, okay. So I'm going to show some of them.
Yay, Catherine's here.
Yeah, and she said, Catherine, she's on bedtime duty. So if anyone can see this comment, Catherine Benfield is an amazing advocate. She's also from the UK. She runs the blog Taming Olivia, it's called, right?
Yeah.
So she was one of the first moms that I ever saw who was speaking up about her experience. And she does great work with maternal OCD charity and what's the other one? OCD Action?
Yeah, OCD Action.
And I saw her speak at Game Changers once. And I'm sure you talked to her, right? She's just amazing, incredible, such an inspiration.
Yeah, she just shares brilliant things, and she's just a real person. I mean, we all are, right? But love you, Catherine.
Let's see. We're coming up on the end. I also hear a lot of action happening in my kitchen. So I just wanted to see if there was a few more questions that anyone wanted to ask. I always like to ask, what are you most proud of for, what have you accomplished lately, like in regards to your OCD?
I think that ability to recognize triggers, like we were talking about sort of before this live started, just that sense of like going, okay, well, that's a trigger, so my brain's gonna do something with it. I'm either gonna get over it quickly, or I just see it as an opportunity to kind of test out exposure. So for me, exposure is very much just facing the thoughts. Again, I don't know if I've said it on the live, but that sense that if I'm watching a film or watching a TV show or reading a book where something comes in that triggers me and sort of sets my mind running, that I don't stop reading the book, that I don't stop watching the TV show, or, you know, because that is an avoidance, and that even, it's a sense of exposure. I mean, I love horror movies. Like I've always loved horror movies.
That's so interesting. Like, I hate horror movies always.
I think again, it's not quite the theme, right? So I've never thought that I would murder someone. Like that's not been a theme for me. So, but still, I avoided horror movies because I thought this is going to trigger me. No, I like you know, nothing too psychological. It has to be like Scream or like a hokey kind of.
Oh yeah, so it has to be. It's actual like horror instead of like a psychological thriller.
Yeah. I'm not great with psychological stuff, but I think that, but yeah, it's probably avoided for more people, like, you know, with fragile sensibilities. But yeah, I'm just proud of being able to understand it, and I'm also proud of the fact that I identify, and again, this is hugely from Catherine, but that sense of like self-love, like, you know, fandangled as it sounds, it's like, you know, I'm not going, like, I felt so awful about myself for so long, like, but the only way you can recover is by going, well, I love myself anyway, like, even with all these thoughts or what's happened in the past, because otherwise you won't be able to help yourself kind of get better if you don't love yourself enough. I don't know. I don't know how
you have to have a certain amount of love for yourself in order to put in the work and to dedicate enough time to recovery, because it does require a lot, and it requires that you put yourself first. And how can you put yourself first if you don't even think that you're worthy, right?
Yeah, totally. You have to be like huge. I'll never forget my therapist at early stages saying, you have to be so brave. Like, you're literally throwing yourself into the precipice.
Like jumping into a fire.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about just, if you feel yourself getting triggered, instead of turning away from it, you just go right towards it. I think that's such a helpful tool and a helpful part of the process.
Yeah.
Like, you can't give your OCD any more ammunition, and running away from what scares you is basically the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, totally. And I think that it's that acceptance of uncertainty, and also one really important thing is that recovery like isn't linear. So it's not like you'll start getting better and you just keep getting better and better. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Like, I've had many setbacks and whatever you want to call it, like relapses, where I thought, oh, all the hard work I've put in isn't working. But it just takes time. You know, I didn't recover in 10 weeks. I had 10 sessions and then I worked at it like myself. And then I touched base with her, and then I sort of, you know,
So now if you feel yourself starting to relapse, or if you feel the OCD starting to get its tentacles in again, what do you do? So that it doesn't come full force again.
Yeah. In the sort of forefront, it is just recognition. Okay, I recognize that was a trigger. That's why I feel this way. Then it is a bit of kind of like flooding my mind. So I'll always try and outdo it. So I'll be like, okay, well, I can do it. I can think of something worse. Or like you sort of said, like, try and do one up on the OCD rather than arguing with it. I don't argue with it. I don't say, oh, that's an awful, you know, I would never do that. I go, well, yeah, maybe I will. And then it kind of like,
it kind of backs off if you just say, yeah, I may do that, or I might never know if I'll do that or not.
Yeah. But that's hard at the start. Like, I couldn't have done that at the beginning, because it's like,
no, it takes some time. You have to progress really slowly. Otherwise, it can be like too much, and then you're worse than where you started.
Yeah, 100%. And a good therapist will lead you through it in the way that's right for you. Like,
okay, can you see that? How do you deal with speaking to loved ones about intrusive thoughts?
Okay, so something that I think is a good idea with this, because sometimes it's really hard to articulate it yourself. It's so great about the Made of Millions and like Intrusive Thoughts website. I don't know, it's one now, isn't it? But is to find a video of like a professional like talking about it, and then that immediately puts it in a term, a phrase that, you know, people will understand, and it's a professional talking about it. So it's like, look, this is a real thing. So, because sometimes you'll be so upset and you'll be so sort of, that's why, it is hard to explain it to people. You don't know how they're going to react. They might be brilliant.
It's hard to explain if you're talking with like a lot of emotion, because I feel like this is going to be a really broad statement, but if you're like a woman with a baby, they people expect you to be crying and emotional, and they expect you to overreact. So when you can explain, when you talk about having thoughts like that and you're very reactive, people, it's like easy for people to just shrug it off and say, oh, it's the hormones, or it's because she's pregnant. She's not really worried. So I think the idea of bringing in a professional,
it's like an article. It's a real thing. It's a serious thing. It is a real thing, you know. But you can recover, and therefore it's just really important to just go to that professional stuff. I think again, the Made of Millions website is so great. So if you want to communicate it for the first time to a partner or loved ones or friends, like sometimes it's best to say, watch this video. A video, you know, again, videos on the Made of Millions website. Watch this video. This is what I have, rather than trying to explain it yourself. Like, you're going through enough. And then hopefully you can then open up about it, but don't put it all on yourself to explain it. It's not, it's almost not your job. Like,
no. Yeah. It's your job to help yourself. And then it's the other person's job or your partner's job to know that you have the condition, and then they can read about it and they can learn about it and they can do your part. Because it's enough to have to help yourself get better. Okay. Let's see. Any last question? So do you have anything you would want to say to a mom who thinks she might have postpartum OCD, or is having intrusive thoughts, or is having weird obsessions, but hasn't reached out for help yet?
Well, to reach out for help, obviously. But again, to just be mindful of making sure that you're sort of doing it in the right way for yourself. So sometimes even confessing things is a compulsion in itself, like, you know. So I think going to the right kinds of websites that show what this is, but get help, because you cannot get over it on your own. You cannot.
You can't read the books. You can read the books, you can read the blogs, you can read the stories of hope, but you can't read yourself out of OCD.
No.
I think it's really important to stress.
It will make you feel better for a little while, but you need to get proper. You need basically exposure therapy.
And you can't do ERP by yourself. I just wouldn't recommend it.
No.
And thinking about it.
And also, like, just making sure that you trust your therapist, and that you find the right person. And you might not find the right person straight away, but keep looking for the right kind of therapist for you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for coming on here. This is the first time we've actually spoken. So it was really nice to meet you, and I just thank you for sharing your story and revisiting some of those hard memories.
Yeah, I think I realized how important it was for me to see other people do that. So I feel like this is me doing my part.
If anyone wants to find you on Instagram, can they do that?
Sure. Yeah, I think sometimes. Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about my child, and I don't know how interesting it is, but I'm Kim, my Instagram is Kim L French, and I think I went through a period of time where I spoke about,
because I saw at one point you were sharing about it.
Yeah. I spoke about it a lot, like during the time of it happening and then coming out the other side. So you can almost trace back my recovery, like when she was really small.
Yeah.
Which might be interesting, but I don't talk about it as much anymore. But maybe I will. I don't know. I've written some articles that have been on blogs, so I could share those again. But I think if you look back in I'm just having a look now. Yeah, if you look back in some of my,
I think it's in the very beginning.
You can see. Yeah, I do. I have got like a highlights thing about OCD.
Okay, well, I put your Instagram on there so anyone can follow you if they want. If you want to hear any more stories about moms who have postpartum OCD, you can check out madeofmillions.com. They have lots of articles and stories from many people who send their things in. You can also check out my blog, windsorflynn.com. I have a few mental health stories up right now with postpartum OCD. And I also have an Instagram at Windsor.Flynn. And you can check that out. I give lots of postpartum OCD support and information. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye, Kim.
Bye.